Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to IORadio with your host, Adam. Today on the show is independent journalist and IT professional, David Gerard. David has written a number of books about the crypto industry and has a very popular blog and writes a lot of articles about what's going on in the crypto industry and all of its many colorful characters and the twists and turns. He's also one of the people that has been covering this for the longest time that is pretty unapologetic about how he feels the whole industry is largely, just a mess of fraud. We have a lot of people that cover crypto stories, but they kind of pretend that blockchain has potential and, because they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. But in this case, David is part of a duo, him and Amy Castor, who continually crank out articles that really show that there just seems to be a never-ending array of fraud in this industry. And he's one of the people that is helping push that narrative to the forefront. So without further ado, let's join David in a conversation. So welcome, David. How are things?
Things are great. That is, life continues, and it's pretty good.
All right. Well, you haven't been indicted by the SEC yet, so that's good.
That's always a good start. Yes. I've yet to have FinCEN knock down my door for money laundering, so that's always nice as well.
I hear you. So, as I understand it, you're an Australian living in the UK. How did you end up there, and is journalism your principal vocation?
I came here basically on holiday, and I decided, this is pretty good, and I'm sick of Melbourne, so I moved here. And that was 20 years ago, and now I have an English wife and kids, so I guess I'm staying. My mother is English, so they can't throw me out. So it's pretty cool. My main day job is I'm a system administrator. I just work in IT. I used to be a journalist many years ago. I was a music journalist. This pays really badly, and then I remembered I was good at computers. That pays a lot better. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I have what is basically half a job writing about finance, specifically crypto, and I absolutely fell into this. I started this book about Bitcoin, why Bitcoin is stupid. And that was in 2016. Now, at that time, nobody cared, right? Bitcoin was this thing that had happened a couple of years before. Mm-hmm. The 2013 bubble, 2014 Mt. Gox crash. So nobody cared. And I sort of just wrote this book I was going to self-publish, and I expected to sell 300 copies. Because that's a pretty good self-publishing. If you can write anything, if you're any good and you have decent social media, you can sell 300 books on Kindle. Mm-hmm. So that was fine. But then by the time it came out was July 2017, and the 2017 bubble was in full swing. So basically I had perfect timing, and it is now sold somewhere around 15,000, which is pretty good.
Wow. Yeah. And this is Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain?
That is Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain. And I started a Patreon for the blog. Well, I started the blog, and then I started a Patreon for it. And it's now running around $900 a month. So it's not a living, but it's certainly pretty good beer money.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So that's been going for the last 6 years, coming up 7 years. God.
There's it's kind of like a myth that everything in Australia is out there to kill you. Is there any comparable thing in the UK like there, that you have to worry about, like you might have had with spiders or snakes in Australia?
In Britain, the main danger is the other British people. But right. That's you should think of British politeness and reserve as more like mutual assured destruction.
I got you.
They're absolutely the most batshit insane people. They're great. Love them. Mm-hmm. Yes. They're amazing creatures. You could almost think they're humans sometimes.
So you've been there since the whole Brexit thing happened, right?
God, yes.
So what was your take on that? Did you not think that was going to go through, or are how has England changed post Brexit?
It's being run by a bunch of incompetent kleptocrats. It is impossible to overstate the incompetence of the present government, and that basically their working method is to steal everything and give it to their mates, really, really blatantly. They can't run things, they can't manage things, and nothing works. So the opposition Labour Party, I mean, this is like the Republicans and Democrats, is the Conservatives and Labour, it's they're broadly aligned, and they're just going to walk it in. So they feel like they don't have to do a lot of work, and they don't. But you sort of wish they'd be a bit nicer about things, but they frankly don't have to work very hard. And it's hard to imagine they'd be more incompetent.
So
if there was ever a clapped out government, it's the UK Tory government after 30 years.
Does the UK have like what we have here in America? Because one of the things that kind of started this division between the left and the right, and it's such a serious, crazy part it is now, has been the advent of this right-wing media. These 24-hour news channels like Fox and Newsmax and OAN that have just parroted this crazy narrative that's almost Orwellian, right? But I understand
they've tried it here. And it never quite catches on. I mean, the newspapers are like this, actually. There's a lot of crazy garbage in the mainstream newspapers, which have a terrible hold on power. The Daily Mail and The Sun, for example, or The Telegraph if you're getting fancy. But they tried it on with absolutely batshit insane stuff like GB News and Talk TV. And GB News has a distinct lack of viewers, and Talk TV just shut down. So that was specifically to try a Fox News sort of thing. I mean, the thing about it in America is that this stuff isn't people's organic opinions. Like, how the conspiracy theorists go on about how Soros is actually trying to bring about communism in America because billionaires are really into their communism. This is, of course, projection, because actually it's all the crazed billionaires funding a world of wingnut welfare, and this is quite well documented, It's like Harlan Crow funding University of Texas at Austin and the Free Press and so on. And Peter Thiel's hobby is basically funding a million little think tanks and magazines and outlets doing horrible things. So a lot of it is artificial. They've tried importing the culture war things to the UK. It doesn't quite hit the same here. So at least that's nice. But yeah, so this stuff isn't actually popular, and it's basically astroturf.
Yeah, see, I kind of figured that, at least with like a state-run media like the BBC, it was going to be a little bit more moderate, rather than our corporate-run media in America. But I guess you guys are still affected by the right-wing mania over there, even though you don't have the outlets we have to brainwash people.
Well, the government has put a lot of pressure on the BBC to get into line. So I'm presuming that will moderate. Basically, the next election has to happen by the end of this year, but they're dragging their feet because they know they're out.
So you're seeing the Labour Party get a little bit more power these days?
They're going to win the next election. Like, there's no way they can't win it. I can't think of a method. Unless something truly unexpected happens, I can't imagine how they would lose it. Because the Tories are just... They basically done nothing and had no actual sort of platform or ideas or ideology for the last 2 years. And they've been consistently 20% ahead in all the polls.
Yeah, same thing with the Republicans. We have a joke here. If you want to silence a Republican, ask them to explain what they've done for the working class in the last 40 years.
That's easy. They'll call you a wokist.
Right. So let's talk about some of the stuff that you've done. You covered a lot of interesting news in the crypto world. But before we get to that, so you, as an IT person, you were motivated to write this book, Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain. What essential elements do you want people to know about these subjects, Bitcoin, blockchain, Ethereum, smart contracts? What's the takeaway from your book?
The takeaway is that none of this is about the technology. It's all about the psychology of get-rich-quick schemes. Nothing is for free. You cannot get rich for free. Magic doesn't happen. If someone tells you magic can happen, especially if it's magic with money, they're trying to pick your pocket. Mm-hmm. No exceptions. You'd think that was obvious, but the chance to get ahead is so tempting that people put in all their money anyway. And and I know that they're going to lose it, but maybe they won't. Maybe they'll be the lucky one. And sometimes they are, sometimes. And if you win big on crypto, then good luck, but you must think of it as having won a lottery. And that's not an investment strategy. Put your money away, don't blow it, basically, at that point.
Mm-hmm. I guess you never anticipated that the industry was going to continue to blossom the way it has, right? Because from our perspective, it just seemed like a giant Ponzi scheme, and eventually it would collapse, but it just seems to just refuse to die.
It's pretty amazing. There's some shocking things. Like we made all the crypto critics made a big fuss about Tether. Then we find out from Zeke Fox's book that New York gathered up all this evidence on Tether, wrapped a big ribbon around it with a bow on top, handed it to the feds, and they were like, we can't be bothered. We're a bit busy right now. Mm-hmm. Holy crap. Come on. Now they care because Tether's being used to violate sanctions, and they really care a lot about sanctions. But the financial fraud, they didn't give a hoot. They could have busted them. They just sort of didn't bother. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. Certainly agencies are overstretched and under-resourced. That's a serious problem. Systemic underfunding of government agencies is a real problem, right, especially in finance, because it's like why the Republicans always fight back against more funding for the IRS, because they don't want the IRS going after them. It's I don't know. All you can do is keep trying to tell people that magic doesn't happen. And right, then you get worked examples like our good friend Sam Bankman-Fried, who sounded like none of what he said makes sense, but it sounded really magical. He charmed a lot of people. He looked like this quite innocent nerd who was going to use his supercomputer genius to bring us to a new era of magical money. And then it turned out, whoops, he actually stole it all. So, who could have predicted that? Everyone. But, we could. No one else could. It was obvious from the moment FTX started, from when Alameda started, that these people were not on the level in any sense whatsoever. But, the details turn out to be worse and stupider than we thought. I've absolutely been disabused of anything resembling the efficient market hypothesis. The idea that if the market has all the information, then prices flow to where they should be. This is obviously just wrong. And Bitcoin is the worst example. Crypto is the worst example, because you get the financial press, they write about Bitcoin, they're writing about stocks, like properly regulated stock market entities that have a lot of volume and a lot of regulators and a lot of known entities dealing in them. And you can talk about market forces and interest rates and so on. With the Bitcoin price, the answer is always shenanigans. Someone's right, manipulating the market. Mm-hmm. And the question then is not, is it because there's interest rate announcement in 3 days? No, it bloody is. It's because someone's pumping it,
Right.
It's always dumber and more manipulated than you thought. And this is always true. And you can point at the manipulators and say, you're right, this is happening on this exchange with these stable coins, which turned out not to be backed. That sort of thing. And nobody cares. Because this all...
It's a very, very weird situation. And I'm gonna bring up some topics and just have you give us your the summary of where we're at now. But you mentioned Tether earlier, and Tether is in the news, out of the news, in the news, out of the news, and I see a lot of people overcomplicating the situation with Tether. To me, they're a company that claims that they produce a stable coin that's backed 1-to-1 with fiat. Okay, so just show us where the money is, and then that'll be verification that what you're doing is legit. And you do that with a formal independent audit, which they have never done. So to
And
me,
they can't do.
yeah, everything else that they're up to seems superfluous to that. But the whole mainstream media wants to ignore the fact that the one way they can prove they're not liars is a simple industry standard process they won't submit to. And that just keeps getting swept under the rug. It's like this whole industry just constantly creates more and more distractions to take away from the main thing, which is, what exactly do you do that I want? Oh, not really anything, but here's AI, or here's this, or here's that.
This is why Zeke Fox's work was so great. I mean, Number Go Up, that book's basically the story of Tether. He's very gentle on them, gentler than I would have been. But he does a reasonable job of showing there isn't much of a there. And, that every Tether is backed by $1, that has a great big asterisk on it. And the asterisk is some of this is Bitcoins and some of it is loans. Some of it is loans of tethers, where the tethers were created out of thin air and the reserve is the loan itself as an asset. And you go, that sounds bogus.
Right.
Banks do that. The backing reserve for a bank loan is the loan. But
there's collateral too. Banks have collateral that they vet at least.
Oh, there may or may not be collateral, but that's literally how the money is literally created out of thin air. But it turns out banks are highly regulated.
Right.
Because to some extent, a banking license is literally a license to print money. This is where something like 80% of all cash comes from, is from bank loans, usually made to businesses. And that's fine. That's the economic process. That's how this all actually works. I mean, a lot of Bitcoiners, they go on, they're very into the idea of a sort of stable, limited currency, Austrian economics, gold standard, where the money represents a certain amount of a solid object, gold or Bitcoins.
Right, that's deflationary.
Version. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the thing is that money hasn't been like that for coming up to a century now. And arguably it wasn't completely that before either. Money is a completely made up social construct. Money isn't real. And I feel like that's like an adult thing you have to understand. Mm-hmm. It's like, this is all made up. It's all ration tickets in an economy, and they keep it flowing around to keep people doing stuff. And the US dollar is not worth something because there's a pile of gold at Fort Knox. It's worth something because 300 million people accept it.
Right. And that central authority is what gives it its utility.
Yes. It's accepted both by the government and by society, because you need both.
So right? where is Tether right now? What is the situation with them legally? Or I understand, now there's supposedly some collusion going on between them and various authorities. What's your take on that?
So like Amy and I just wrote a thing recently about Tether and its sanctions problems, because Tether has long been used basically for money laundering. Crime just runs through Tether and nobody cares. But it's getting into sanctions evasion. That's serious stuff. That's FinCEN gets the local police to break down your door stuff. Mm-hmm. That's serious criming. Now, I'm not a huge fan sometimes of the anti-money laundering laws. I should stress that. I'm not actually a huge fan of them sometimes. I think they overreach a lot and they don't work very well, and they're a pain in the bum for ordinary consumers. Mm-hmm. People who've got stories of PayPal freezing their own money because stuff like that. But they are the situation we have. They are the regulation that everyone works under, is the AML laws as they exist. The sanctions laws are sort of the AML laws on steroids. We're really serious about this laws, because they're the national defense. Because the US quite seriously uses the power of the dollar and international sanctions instead of sending soldiers. So they would much rather use sanctions than send soldiers. Sanctions are literally part of the US national defense.
Yeah.
The international sanctions regime is mostly driven by the US and by Europe. They both participate heavily in the Financial Action Task Force, which is the sort of produces guidelines for international regulators on money laundering. But the US does a lot of the heavy lifting. Um, Now, if Tether is getting into funneling money through for sanctioned entities, the US is going to look at them extremely askance. The danger there is that even though Tether doesn't have a lot of US links, it's a non-US company. None of the principals are Americans, that sort of thing. It doesn't operate in America. None of these guys set foot in America, actually. When
Right, but
New
Tether
York
is being
was,
traded back and forth at all the major exchanges, so that is,
oh yeah,
in America.
yes, they have some links to America, but they're sort of hard to sort of grab. Um, but if they mess with sanctions, then that gets them into a lot of trouble.
So
Because
presumably the authorities are working with them. Do we know to what degree that's happening?
no, the only knowledge we have of this is what Tether have said. And the thing about Tether is they don't do or say anything unless there's a gun to their head. So
And usually when they say
uh,
something, it's a lie. So for all we
they've
know,
taken lately to not lying as such. They say things that are true from a certain point of view if you squint.
mhm,
So you can have a lot of, I mean, you can assume on the first level, yeah, that's basically probably not very true and I shouldn't rely on it. But it can be an interesting game to work out. Now, what would the true version of that look like?
mhm.
You know, like
So you
when
don't
they
really
say
know what.
loans,
So
you
you
know,
really don't know what's going to happen with them in the near future. You don't necessarily have any particular
I would not
predictions.
predict timing. I am pretty sure the authorities will shut down Tether by the end of 2017 at latest. Now,
2017. You mean?
I might have been wrong about that one. So they're a freaking cockroach. You know, they can't be
Right.
killed. Um, anyway, but at the moment they do worry because if Tether was sanctioned as a foreign entity, that would mean it was cut off from the US financial system. They couldn't touch dollars anymore. They couldn't store US treasuries. Um, but also a sanctioned foreign entity on the OFAC list, if anyone else deals with them, they can get in trouble
Right.
and they can get cut off from US dollars.
It makes you wonder if, like, the authorities have that as an option, and in return they could get
Oh,
Tether to
it's a
roll
very big
over.
stick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also, most of us recognize or believe that the Tether doesn't have the reserves that they're claiming. And by complying with OFAC stuff, this gives them justification to not redeem the tethers that they never had backing for.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll manage to rack up 100 billion. So our guess is that, well, the Tether Reserve, as I said, Tether tend to say things that are true from a certain point of view if you squint.
Right.
So if they say they have $100 billion worth of reserves, I would I would assume that they have things written on a balance sheet that add up to $100 billion.
Right.
Now they might be squirrels and confetti, but they'll add up to $100 billion. It's like our FTX's Alameda's reserve was actually made of FTT tokens that could never be sold,
Hmm.
but they were accounted at $5.5 billion.
Right.
And that was obviously nonsense to anyone, and that's why the moment that came out, everyone took all their money out, and FTX collapsed. But it's you can fill up balance sheets with nonsense for a certain amount of time,
Especially
but
in an
eventually,
industry where there's not really any oversight or regulation, I guess is the.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
And the facts that, like, I mean, one of the greatest scam innovations was really when exchanges started creating their own tokens. Like, I was calling this about BNB token, Binance's one in 2019 or 2020, whenever they were doing that. It was like, these are supermarket loyalty card points. They're not money,
Hmm.
you know? They're like in the UK, Tesco, biggest supermarket. You go to Tesco, you can have a club card. It gives you club card points, 1 penny for every pound you spend.
Right.
Now, that's supposedly worth 1 penny, but like it's just a made up number inside Tesco's systems.
Mm-hmm.
If they produce accounts saying, yep, Tesco's having a great year, we're full of cash, we're absolutely full of money, we're doing wonderfully. Then you look at the accounts and it's 3/4 club card points are counted as pounds. You go, that's bollocks, that is. You know, but
Right.
and people would go to jail. But in crypto, that's normal. So Binance's reserve has BNB in it. When Celsius collapsed, it should have been obvious by that point. June, July, I think it was July, was it? I think it was July when Celsius declared bankruptcy, or was it June? One of those. In 2022, their assets and liabilities, they had way more liabilities than assets, but also their liabilities were real, but their assets were basically imaginary. They were like cell tokens, which had no market, and they were accounting them a great big pile of cell tokens that no one would ever buy as being a whole pile of money. And it's like, what the hell? And it was obvious then that everyone was doing this. The only reason to make up your own token is so you can pull nonsense stunts like that.
Right.
And so FTX having the same problem, well, it was a bit of a shock, but it wasn't really a shock. The timing was a surprise, but the fact wasn't a shock.
So speaking of that, Coinbase, in an article you wrote, their recent first quarter earnings were based on some creative accounting, right? There was some change in accounting methodology that they adopted that allowed them to suddenly inflate the value of the assets that they had. Can you explain what that and why would this be allowed is what I want to know.
Right. So they changed an accounting rule. Now, I don't know why they changed that rule, but basically, the way if you bought cryptocurrency before, Bitcoins or whatever, you could only account them at either the price you paid for them or the current value, whichever was less. If the price went down, then suddenly you had to account for them at the lowest price of the asset. If they went up, you couldn't say that they'd gone up under General Accepted Accounting Practice Rules, GAAP, which all US public companies have to use. So this rule changed in December 2023 to say, actually, you can account them at whatever their value is.
Does this just pertain to crypto, or does it pertain to other assets as well?
I think it was particularly about crypto. It was a change to account them as they account other assets. So arguably, it's not weird. But on the other hand, I think that accounting highly illiquid commodities like crypto at mark to market is basically a dodgy practice anyway. It should be accounted at realizable value, not mark to market value. But everyone likes mark to market because it makes numbers bigger. But mark to market is where you say, I have 10,000 Bitcoins. One Bitcoin is worth $60,000. So therefore, I have billions of dollars. Well, no, you don't. You could never sell them because there isn't that many actual dollars in the system at all. Realizable value would be lower if you had to sell them all. The market would crash.
So Coinbase had to do this to make themselves look more profitable than they really are, right?
Well, they were allowed to, and that put a massive paper profit on their books, and that allowed their numbers to look a lot better. So it's a change in accounting methods that needs to be taken notice of if you want to compare quarters to quarters. So none of this was crooked. It was all according to the rules. I'd like to know more about how that rule got into place, but as I said, it's not an outlandish rule on the face of it.
Well, yeah. Knowing what we know about crypto, it would make more sense for it to be the other way, where you take the lesser, because the market is so volatile. And we don't know much about how much liquidity is in the market. It seems to me that it's a super non-conservative approach now with crypto that's going to cause a lot of harm in the financial markets with that change.
I think so. But, the worst thing is that the SEC was forced to allow Bitcoin ETFs.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So, every few months there seems to be some new thing that all the crypto bros say, this is it. This is going to show that we're mainstream now. And so I guess one of the flavors of the month was ETPs or ETFs. Now that they've been out for a while, what's your consensus on whether the impact that they've had?
So these things, they seem to have taken in about $14 billion, like that since January of inflows. I'm wondering how much of that is fresh fresh buyers and how much is actually people moving other Bitcoin holdings into ETFs.
Yeah, I was under the impression
Because,
that the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, there was a lot of movement from that into these other ETPs.
yeah, there will be a lot of stuff moving out of Grayscale into the others because Grayscale is extremely expensive. Um, it's it's all a bit weird, but the influxes seem to have slowed right down, so that's good. Um, there's also things like they're trying to come up with derivative products like indexes of Bitcoin ETFs, or volatility indexes of ETFs, like basically just ways to bet on the price of Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
except you're actually betting on the price of the ETFs. I mean, to be clear, Wall Street traders will bet on two flies crawling up a wall. And with Bitcoin, they've got two flies that are on acid or something. So it's a lot of fun for traders. Traders love volatile stuff, and Bitcoin is certainly that. You know, because also, I mean, the other thing about ETFs is these aren't actually Bitcoins, they're dollar-based things. You buy and sell them in dollars. Now they have to buy and sell the Bitcoins that are backing them, so that does affect the Bitcoin market and price. But everyone in this is dealing in dollars. So they're sort of like, I'm pretty sure that was not what the Satoshi's white paper specified. Yeah. But I think it's also true, it's been true for a long time that approximately there's a lot of talk of ideology and Bitcoin ideology and decentralization and libertarian economics and Austrian economics and so on and so on and so forth. That's all bullshit. Nearly 100% of Bitcoin market participants are in it for the US dollars.
Right.
Ideology is something that these people who are in it for the dollars talk about if they think it's a marketing point. It is not the actual thing they want or care about. I mean, they like the idea of being outside the eye of regulators, but they'll certainly accept regulation if that means there's a lot more dollars to be made. You know,
Right.
I mean, this is why people come to New York, the most highly regulated financial market in the world, because it's also the market where all the money is, you know.
Right.
So the thing about ETFs is I think they've slowed down. I think the influxes seem to have stopped. Like there's still sort of some days positive, some days it's negative, and so on. Basically, it's a toy for large institutional traders that are basically gambling on the price of Bitcoin because they're after the USD.
Gotcha. So, what's your take on CZ and Binance? Now, he recently was handed down a sentence that was very, very light, and a lot of people are speculating that he may be cooperating with the authorities in return for this lighter sentence, given that basically he and Sam Bankman-Fried were like two peas in a pod, right? So, what's your take on what's going on with Binance and CZ?
So CZ, he basically, I'm pretty sure from all the redactions in the defense sentencing memo, which is like there's whole 4 pages that are blank there, that he has, I think it's likely he has actually like sung like a bird for the authorities, and that's why he got only 4 months. And that's like in a remand center in Seattle. And then he's a free man. He still can't work at or be on the board of Binance in any manner, but he's still an owner. Um, so he's done remarkably free out of it. That said, he is definitely the richest guy who is in an actual jail right now in the US. So that's something. Um, the I really hope that whatever he told the authorities, if anything, was wonderfully useful to him to get only 4 months instead of 18 or 36.
Mm-hmm.
But which he probably should have got for the actual crimes he was convicted of that he pleaded guilty to. So yeah, Binance itself. Now the thing about Binance is they got a $4 billion fine, which can be paid is being paid scheduled to be paid over like a year or two. But that's not the actual punishment. The actual punishment is having to do compliance, because it's bad enough when banks that get that, right?
Right.
Like HSBC grossly violated all money laundering laws and they got $1 billion fine. But worse than that, they got compliance. And that means you basically have to start a whole department inside your bank where you employ maybe a few hundred people. You pay for it all. And everything you do, they hit you around the head if it looks like it might possibly be within a mile of violating compliance. It's a pain in the backside.
Mm-hmm.
And banks cope with this. Banks know how to deal with compliance, right? Because they're a highly regulated entity. They're a public utility for the flow of cash, and they're expected to follow rules already. So compliance means they follow more rules. Crypto, on the other hand, was made up by libertarian bozos off the top of their heads. So none of this stuff works. It's all very stupid and it's all assembled out of paper clips and string. You tell those guys, right, you're going to employ a couple of hundred people to regulate your compliance. Yeah, and you're going to pay for them all. They're going to be really expensive. They're going to be up in all your business. It's going to be hard for them.
Yeah.
It's going to be hilarious. I think it's just an absolutely hilarious outcome for a crypto exchange to have to do serious bank level compliance because it is so alien to everything that crypto people claim to believe.
Yeah, I got to admit that dabbling in this industry is kind of interesting and fun. I don't know about you, but I'll wake up some mornings and, as soon as you hit F5 on your browser, there's a little bit of an endorphin rush. It's like, who's going to be indicted today? What crazy shit has happened overnight? The last couple of days, the 2 MIT graduates that ran the MEV scam took $25 million in 12 seconds.
It's hilarious. It's like the collapse started in mid-2022 and it's still going nearly 2 years later.
So let's talk about some of the more colorful characters in this industry. We have probably one of the top ones is Michael Saylor and his company MicroStrategy. What is your take on him?
Jesus. So he's reputed to have been, how do I put this, a massive cocaine hoover in his earlier days. Now, I am sure that Mr. Saylor would certainly have abandoned such terrible pursuits and be living a very alleged pursuits and be living a very clean and healthy lifestyle these days. And he just acts like that because he's high on Bitcoin itself. So I don't know what the hell is up with MicroStrategy. It's a company that holds a huge pile of Bitcoin and that's its entire thing. Now, it's sort of bizarre because MicroStrategy was a business intelligence company. They basically sell software to businesses to monitor your business, like Power BI does at Microsoft or SAP or whatever. Like that's a real business. Apparently their product is okay. It's not as good as the others, but it's a real product that does things. And it did quite well in 2020, for example. But then at the end of 2020, he just went all in on Bitcoin. And he had a massive pile of cash because the business had done quite well. Because that was the pandemic lockdown. Suddenly everyone was at home. And so he sold business monitoring services really well. So he had a pile of cash. He gave half of it back to the stockholders. So number go up. And then he spent half on a Bitcoin stash. And his investors couldn't really complain, his shareholders, because shareholders can sue you for anything or nothing. Everything is securities fraud, as Matt Levine puts it. But the number went up, so they didn't really have a cause of action. And what he's done now is this software company, it's turned into basically a company that owns a lot of Bitcoin. That's its entire thing. It's sort of like a one-way ETF without being an ETF. And that's its only pitch. But we have proper ETFs now for Bitcoin if you really want to put your money into Bitcoin. It's like, this is nuts. I do not understand why MicroStrategy's stock price still goes up in any manner. it does not make sense to me. It's a Bitcoin fund with a software business bolted on the side.
So he's basically kind of turned a legitimate company into a meme stock almost.
Sort of a Bitcoin meme stock. It doesn't have that sort of craze factor that meme stocks do. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's not. I do not understand it though.
I
People
guess the
must be
interesting
buying
thing is,
MicroStrategy for some reason.
I guess the interesting thing is that he's running this all through his public company, so he's not even personally having a tremendous amount of liability. He's kind of putting it on all the shareholders. Although I assume he's a majority shareholder, which is why he's able to force the company to do these kinds of things. But right, if if or when Bitcoin crashes, it's going to be the company that goes down, right? Not him.
Yep, and he'll be suable for that. But because everything is securities fraud. But if but it'll be a question of whether a suit would win. You know, it's I would say that anyone who is buying MicroStrategy stock in 2024 is on board with the sale program. And it's like just very, very stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is, before ETFs, there were a lot of institutions that should have known better who really wanted to get exposure to the price of Bitcoin. So they'd do things like buy Coinbase stock because that tracks the price of Bitcoin. Um, they'd buy mining stocks because a lot of Bitcoin miners are US public companies. And like I've got a whole rant about those and how they're basically a sort of complicated stock fraud on naive institutional investors who really should have known better. But I feel a bit less bad about that than I would if they were going after retail investors because we're talking about large companies who definitely they're rich enough that their money is their own problem. They are fully equipped to know better and they're doing it anyway. You know, I feel less pain for them. Mum and dad, I'll get angry about that. Um, Large company buys MicroStrategy, they probably deserve everything that happens to them.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of other characters, let's talk about Max Kaiser. Have you ever met
God,
him? Is he as crazy as he seems? Do you have any sort of take on him and what's his motivation? Is he some kind of Russian agent? What is his deal?
now, so Max Kaiser were Max or Kaiser or Kaiser, I'm not sure how it's properly pronounced. He was a trader, a quite successful one, on Wall Street. Like a lot of Wall Street traders, he's a gold bug. There are a lot of gold bugs in trading on Wall Street, but nobody cares if you're completely crazy on Wall Street as long as you trade well. You know, as
Mm-hmm.
long as you do your job, fine. Nobody cares. Um, but he was a serious gold bug. Then he parlayed that into a sort of financial influencer job. Then he got a show on RT,
Russia
and now
Times.
Russia Today.
Uh-huh.
Now it's everything's a bit more state controlled these days because Putin's going full authoritarian. But before this, right, say through the 2010s, you'd have like Russia One, which was sort of like the Russian BBC equivalent. It was a state broadcaster, but it wasn't a propaganda broadcaster. Or NTV was the main commercial network in Russia. And like I've at various times dealt with people from these companies, they're just quite normal. You know, just normal broadcasting type people, you know. Um, and then you'd have RT, which was explicitly started as a propaganda operation. And like when I was the press guy for Wikipedia in the UK in the late 2000s, early 2010s, I'd talk to the NTV or whatever, and they'd be normal. I talked to Russia Today, and they'd be crazy people.
Mm-hmm.
They'd be trying to push me really hard to say the quote they had in mind, and it was always something running down the US. And it was just weird. And thankfully, I'm reasonably good at media, so I know how not to give the juicy quote they were looking for. But it was RT was absolutely nuts, and they're still nuts. Um, Russia One, I mean, it's and NTV are more propagandistic now because otherwise they'd be dead. But they used to be a lot more normal. Russia Today was always insane. Um, so Max Keiser signs up with RT. He is signing on as Putin's propaganda man. Full stop. I don't think that's an overstatement. That's a strong statement, but I don't think it's an overstatement. And now he's living in El Salvador and working with Bukele on Salvadoran Bitcoins. And he's the libertarian who gets flown around in military helicopters because libertarians are very into the military and helicopters. And it's like, what the hell? You know, this is the very restricted form of libertarianism where it's liberty for your money and everyone else can go hang.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is such a thing as sincere libertarianism, right? There are libertarians they sincerely want less government. They think things would work. They might be wrong, but they're not crazy assholes, you know. But
Right.
Max Keiser is certainly a crazy asshole, in my opinion.
And so
And
where do you think he's
yeah.
going with the Bitcoin thing? Is this just his personal interest, or has he got some kind of other agenda?
I think these guys' agenda is full stop to keep their money out of the sight of regulators. Now, that's the purpose of Bitcoin. That was always the purpose of Bitcoin. That was why Bitcoin was invented. That was the techno-libertarian dream that those guys have always wanted. That's what they want Bitcoin for. That's certainly what he wants it for. These guys can think of nothing more evil than being taxed.
Right.
You know, these are the guys. That's basically the thing he's after is a sufficiently alternate financial system that he can shift his money around out of sight of the regulators, and that whatever he's shifting around will be taken seriously as money. With Bitcoin, that's a bit of a shell game because, as you know, the liquidity doesn't exist to cash out.
Mm-hmm.
When Russia invaded Ukraine, it was actually, this is hilarious. A lot of Russian oligarchs had a bunch of Bitcoin in reserve, like billions of dollars face value of Bitcoin in reserve. They do things like they say, right, Russia's been sanctioned. I need my cash now. They go to their Swiss banker and say, I want you to cash in my Bitcoin for me. How much do we want me to cash in? $2 billion. Now, you and I can see the problem. Specifically, they can't do that. There isn't $2 billion. You might think that a billionaire would look into the liquidity of their rainy day asset, but apparently these guys didn't because they're dumb gangsters. So, yeah, that's great. I hope they're enjoying their Bitcoins very much.
So what's your take on some of these other people? You've got your Jack Dorsey, your Elon Musk, your Peter Thiels, these rich, they appear to be sociopathic, people, and they're all kind of adjacent to crypto, but they've all got other projects going on. Do you see any kind of pattern with these people?
Same pattern as with Max Keiser. Rich libertarians loathe nothing more than tax and the idea of their movement of their money being regulated.
Even though almost all of them have profited through government programs and things like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you have to understand, once they get paid, it's their money. So that's the driving force, I think. It's quite simply they just don't want their assets to be taxable. I think that was a lot of the motivation for Facebook to actually start Libra. The guys who started it were a bunch of sincere coiners, but I think that the board, I don't have any smoking gun evidence of this. I am surmising it, knowing all the people involved and who they are, including Peter Thiel, who was on Facebook board at the time. Because Facebook has a terrible problem. They have billions of dollars in various countries, and they would really love to repatriate it to the US. But they have to pay tax.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not acceptable. So if they started their own money and could shift stuff around on a Libra blockchain out of the sight of anyone under Swiss regulation rather than US regulation, they'd be delighted.
I can imagine. Let's talk about the halvening. Did it live up to the hype?
Absolutely. Nothing happened. It was great.
The price did not go up. It didn't go down. It just kind of went, meh.
It kept bimbling along, The Bitcoin price is really thin at the moment, and people don't understand how thin. but we can literally see it in Coinbase's 10Q and 10K filings with the SEC, how much money they make from retail trading. And that indicates that retail trading in fourth quarter 2023 was 1/8 what it was in fourth quarter 2022,
Hmm.
2021, sorry, 2 years before, height of the bubble. So it went up again in first quarter 2024, but it's still vastly less than it was last time the price was this high. And that makes me think, there's not a lot of trading, and the number is this high. Perhaps it's manipulation. And of course it is. It's a bunch of tethers and FDUSD, an incredibly dodgy stablecoin that I don't believe is fully backed. Trading in the billions on Binance, one exchange, one unregulated offshore casino.
Right.
Like they're getting money laundering monitors in, but they aren't commodities trading monitors. The exchange will still be able to pull shit, basically. The money laundering will be inspected very closely, but you can still manipulate the market because that's not money laundering. As long as you do it all on the books, it's not any. It's arguably not even illegal if US people aren't involved, because there's specific US laws against manipulation. Like that's why Avi Eisenberg went to jail for DeFi shenanigans. But I'm not sure they apply to non-US persons on a non-US exchange. It's a tricky one. Maybe there's a legal theory that it could, but I think it'd be a lot of work. It's much easier to bust them for sanctions because they were blatantly busting them.
Right. So, how do you predict the crypto industry will eventually settle? Do you think it'll go out with a whimper or a boom? And what would be the principal catalyst, if anything?
So, if anything happens to Tether, it's screwed. They have tried to start other stable coins to replace Tether. None of them have taken on. FDUSD was one that Binance put up to sort of do the job. It's supposedly independent of Binance. It's not. There's TUSD, which was on Tron, that also failed to do the job.
There's also USDC too, Circles.
USDC is a bit more interesting because Circle is distinctly a US entity. They have to obey all US laws. They are in a regulated environment. They still play a bit fast and loose, but they can't do the same blatant offshore criminality. They have to obey US law. So USDC is its main use case is basically for DeFi shenanigans. Like it's a reasonably cashable dollar. As long as things are going well at Circle and Coinbase, you can cash out your USDC. If there's trouble, that's different. But while things are good, you can cash it out for $1 reasonably easily.
So So what do you think is going to happen in the near future? Do you think this is just going to go on and fizzle out, or
So the crypto lobby has a lot of money that they're applying to the job of getting new laws for themselves. But I think the public still thinks crypto is a den of crooks and wants to see these people busted. The busts still make mainstream news.
Right.
We had 2023 was a whole year of the crypto news cycle being Sam Bankman-Fried is a crook and is going to jail. Good. It really warns the general public off that these bozos at the Super Bowl, oh yeah, they're all going to jail now. And they are. It's heartwarming. Like I'm not a big fan of prisons. Ideally, prisons shouldn't really exist. But if we're going to have prisons and cops, then we should definitely have Sam Bankman-Fried as one of the last guys released. And finance cops turn out to be actually pretty cool guys. It's sort of ideals versus practicalities, which is that in the fabulous luxury space communism future, when money doesn't exist and everything is an endless cornucopia, if there are still a few things that are limited in distribution, when we have interminable hours-long meetings to discuss them, we have to stress to Sam that his opinions aren't really welcome.
I getcha. So,
In the so it's okay. The fabulous space like communism future is still has to deal with Bankman-Frieds out there because these people are everywhere.
right, right. So I've coined what I call the ultimate crypto question, which is,
Yes.
can you name one specific non-criminal thing that blockchain does that is better than non-blockchain technology? This is a recurring thing that I ask everybody that comes into our various social media communities. Simple question. 15 years, I have not gotten a good answer. Can you give me a good answer to that?
So the first answer is no, not really. The second answer, like that's not a shallow no. That's a I have followed this extremely closely for several years. I know how the technology works. I know that even as a data store, it's worse than literally every alternative. As money, the technology doesn't matter. It absolutely just does not matter. The technology bit is just cover for creating financial instruments outside regulation.
Mm-hmm.
The use case for blockchains is evading regulation. Sometimes that's justifiable. But because sometimes, regulations, sometimes they're stupid. Regulators can be dumb.
Right.
And sometimes regulations, you should evade them. I can think of use cases for getting money moved around the world which are good and which crypto is the only workable alternative for. Like Sci-Hub, which literally the entire function of science runs on,
Mm-hmm.
can only be funded with crypto, for example. So everyone listening who's a crypto person, has crypto holding, send your crypto to Sci-Hub, and they'll keep science running.
Well, but in fairness now, right, their electricity bills probably can't be paid in crypto. So there still has to be that other transaction where you take the crypto and convert it into fiat.
Yeah.
So,
but their only funding source is via donations via crypto because they've been cut off from all the payment processes because they're a massive copyright violation enterprise, which is illegal. But on the other hand, it is absolutely the most morally justifiable violation of copyright you'll ever see.
Right. I totally agree. But I would say
science literally runs on Sci-Hub. So the use case for blockchain is giving money to Sci-Hub because other things are wrong with the world.
I completely agree with you, but I think this is an example of where crypto doesn't really solve or fix a problem. It's just a kind of a shallow workaround, right?
It's a Band-Aid at best.
Yeah, the problem that with Sci-Hub is that it should be legal what they're doing. Any information that is generally beneficial to all of mankind should be freely available.
Particularly when it was mostly paid for with government grants.
Right. So the solution to the problem isn't to use crypto. The solution is to lobby to change these laws so that these guys can work with banks and can get funded, and this information is more freely available. So I would actually argue using crypto in that instance exacerbates the problem instead of solving it. It just is a workaround. It allows it to remain illegal when the real problem is Sci-Hub, this information should be freely available.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a tactical thing, It's something to do to keep it going while we try to improve things. So, I would not actually stop funding Sci-Hub, and if crypto is going to exist, use that. But it's a pretty tiny use case. And the thing about all these use cases for crypto as a way of moving money where it's morally defensible to do so is that still relies on the liquidity provided by a mountain of crime, a lot of which is really horrible.
Right. We hear that common argument, I'm sending money to help the Ukrainians. And are you really? Do you know where that crypto went? Do you know how it was converted, what it was used for? You don't really. So I have a hard time.
That's a good use. That's an okay use of crypto because Ukraine is fully hooked into financial networks, by the way. You can send them just dollars. But there's no reason they accept crypto because there's a lot of crypto guys there for various reasons, and they like crypto because Zelensky's government is sort of moderate center-right, but with a strong libertarian streak to it. But they're basically sensible about things. But they also have an odd tolerance for crypto. They accept crypto because they'll take money from anyone. and they do cash it all out immediately and put it towards the war effort. Fine, that's what it's for. But like there's other uses. Like in the early days of the invasion, Russia was getting super authoritarian, and anyone the slightest bit weird in Russia was in a lot of trouble. Crypto was useful for helping get people out of Russia. I'd call that a defensible use case, that sort of thing. But again, these use cases shouldn't exist. They're very contingent, but more broadly speaking, there's no long-term future in breaking regulation as a use case because, the regulators will eventually assert themselves.
Right. And then, of course, you have all the other collateral damage. Even though there may be a 1% noble use for this, you have the 99%, which is fraud and human trafficking and cyber terrorism and money laundering.
Precisely.
Right.
All the good stuff relies for liquidity on the bad stuff. So I think that if Tether goes down, then crypto is screwed and Bitcoin crashes. If US regulations tighten up, they're slowly ratcheting tighter and tighter because the government does not like crypto. And they don't like it for sanctions reasons, but they also don't like it for economic stability reasons because in Tether, you have $100 billion fund that is controlled by clowns and bozos who don't know the slightest thing about what the hell they're doing. And that's frightening. If they were competent crooks, that'd be one thing, but they're bozos. These guys have no idea how anything works. They have no idea how economics works. They have no idea how a modern economy actually can function. They think that Austrian economics is true. They're idiots. And so the Treasury quite correctly fears these clowns getting any sort of exposure to the real economy. So that's a correct thing to worry about. That's why Janet Yellen level talks about stable coins and how bad they are. The day after Terra Luna collapsed, sending 20 billion pseudo dollars up in smoke, Yellen was already scheduled to talk to Congress. And so about this one that collapsed yesterday, yeah, we're worried sick about this and we want to come down on these bozos. Please give us a bigger hammer. And again, I will tell you, I have a lot of sympathy for a libertarian sort of idea that you do want the government out of your face, because who wants government in your face? But on the other hand, in this case, I think the government should have a lot of bigger hammers. That'd be good.
Well, David, I want to thank you for being on the show. And before we wrap this up, is there anything else that you're working on? Do you have any books or anything in the pipeline that you want people to know about?
No, I keep completely failing to write another book, but I got lots of ideas. Tell
us where people can find you online and all of that.
So I commonly write a crypto newsletter, mostly co-writing with Amy Castor. We discovered we co-write really well. It works. So we kept doing that. We started after the crash and we keep going. My blog is at davidgerard.co.uk. If you search for David Gerard in Google, you'll find me because I have excellent SEO by virtue of being online since 1995. And you will find my writing there. I'm on Twitter at David Gerard, on Mastodon, David Gerard. You'll find me there. All my social media is linked to my blog, Blue Sky, davidgerard.co.uk. If you search for me if it's David Gerard Bitcoin, you will find me. That's how to find me. I have 2 books, Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain, which is from 2017 about why Bitcoin is stupid and bad. It's 7 years old, but I skimmed it recently and it holds up pretty well. Because it's all about the reasons, and the reasons are that it's a get-rich-quick scheme, and get-rich-quick schemes are all lies. I often say the best book about Bitcoin ever written is Extraordinary Popular Delusions by Charles Mackay from 1842, because scams never change. My other book is Libra Shrugged, about Facebook's Libra coin, the dumbest idea out of Facebook, who
Well, at least a
long
few
history
months.
of dumb ideas, but this was a particularly dumb idea, and how that was killed stone dead by the U.S. government, who are not going to have someone else try to run dollars for them.
Well, thanks for being on, and I will catch you around in the social media sphere, and looking forward to seeing what else you come up with.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, there you go. Another episode done. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and supporting our channel and everything. If you'd like to find out more about us, our main website is ioradio.org. You can also catch us on YouTube at YouTube/American Scream Video. That's where you'll find these podcasts with additional AV added, as well as the documentary Blockchain Innovation or Illusion, which I recommend everybody watch. We're available on all the major podcast streaming platforms, so be sure to look for IORadio. And until next time, I want to personally thank everybody for tuning in and your support.